A blessed day to you. My name is Nigel Daring. I am the originator of the philosophy of Darinism or Darinism. It's a philosophy based upon my analysis of Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. It's an analysis that basically declares that what's written in those pages actually represent reality, and that we can come to understand existence, the physical world, our reality, even the spiritual world, just by studying those pages and coming to understand them. So that's the philosophy, and that's what I've been fleshing out in my previous videos. I hope you check those out. I've done 16 previous videos, um, and so check those out so you can get an idea of what I'm doing today, and that'll serve as a convenient lead-in to what I'm doing today. Um, Today I want to cover vice or virtue, and I just want to point out certain aspects of Adam and Eve's existence in innocence that would be negative in their state of innocence, but in their state of innocence lost, these vices become virtues. All right, so that's what I want to take on today. Of course, um, before we do that, we'll do some review. Also, I just want to give this warning, just in case it happens that I skip slides, that slides are skipped, and it just seems abrupt how that happens. That's not my fault. My computer does that. So just fair warning. If it happens, what I'll do is I'll try to finish my thought from the previous slide before getting into the current slide. Okay, my philosophy of Darwinism is broken down in the book called Existence, God, Man, Society, and Nature, which you can find on www.amazon.com. And you can type in the name of the book, or you can type in my name and you'll see 16 books, and you can get that book or any of my other books. All right, let's move on. So and last time, I mentioned that um, there are a couple these things go together. Heaven and hell, right? That hell has to exist in order for heaven to be real. There can't be a place of paradise unless you can conceive of a place that is not paradise, right? So if God's kingdom is where paradise is and where the angels are and the righteous live, then there has to be this place called hell outside of the kingdom where those who are tortured and evil and so forth do not live, right? And it's stated in Genesis chapter 22, verse 14. We'll see that, right? So we we have to realize that hell has to exist for heaven to make sense, right? If heaven is a place where there is a tree of life, the body of God, where the people are, the righteous people, the angels, God Himself feed off this eternal um, entity that generates life and love, the basic essence that we need to feed off of for our emotional spiritual being. Then there's this place that must be conceived of, that's outside of it, which is hell, where you can't feed off of the tree of life. You can't feed off the eternity of God, or the beauty and the love and the life of God. Um, so that's hell. We have to realize also that if there is this concept of good, then there has to be this concept of evil. Evil has to be able to exist in order for good to be real. And indeed, evil has to exist for consciousness itself to be real, because it's in consciousness that choices are going to be made between good and evil. If there is no evil, then what you have is this your mechanical existence of just functioning without meaning, right? Um, Evil gives good its meaning, so that when you're making a choice, you're making a conscious choice. There's this conscious choice to choose the good of a proper way of functioning, or a proper order, right? As prescribed by God. But then there's the evil, which is to not do that, and to wield your consciousness to that choice. So, and it's like that, this idea that there can't be life without death. In order for life to be understood, then death has to be understood. And that's how, and it relates to heaven and hell. If heaven is the place of life, then hell then becomes a place of death, right? Spiritual death. All right. Now, in terms of what I did last time proper, I was doing clarifications, and I said, I was gonna use in the book Existence, God, Man, Society, and Nature. I basically use Adam and Eve in their innocence to represent primitive man, or indigenous man, man living in the wild without sophisticated cosmopolitan structures, sociopolitical structures, and massive concrete structures, massive iron working, metallurgy going on. So I use Adam and Eve. I'm going to use Adam and Eve to represent man in that state of, of primitive man, indigenous man. Adam and Eve in their innocence before they sin, and then Adam and Eve after they fell from grace with God, as I use them to represent that state of being that they're in. I use them to represent civilized existence, rank order society, basically. That mode of existence. But what I also said is that that's not actually true, because if they're indeed the first people, that means that primitive man, then man living in the wild, actually inherited their sins. So the man living in the wild then do not actually represent Adam and Eve in their innocence. They right? They inherited that sin. So what that basically says, then there has been no perfect culture or society upon the earth, no perfect moral um, culture unblemished by sin upon the earth. Okay, so that's that. So just to be aware that there's a level of inaccuracy with that Adam and Eve in their innocence represent primitive man, primitive societies in the wild. But what that does, though, that what that correlation does, it gives us some approximation of what Adam and Eve in their innocence, how they could represent primitive existence. Okay, right? What primitive existence could reflect Adam and Eve in some approximate way in their innocence. Now we said Adam and Eve in their corrupted state. I'm going to use that to represent um, civilized development, but that's also not quite accurate, because when Adam and Eve sinned, they themselves never really actually aggressively lived in any kind of civilized state where they're developing these massive civilized structures, and that's what they and their progeny are involved with. Rather, the in realistic terms, the comparison between primitive societies and civilized societies that have been known is more of a continuum, and not too they're not two diametrically opposed realities, as we can say there's this firm solid contrast, right? But using Adam and Eve to represent primitive societies, right? Adam and Eve before they sin, and then Adam and Eve after they sin, to represent civilized societies. The distinction that I'm going to, that distinction is a matter of convenience, but it's also helpful, right? When we approximate and we look at these contrasts, because there's still a certain level of contrast between mankind living in the wild versus mankind living in massive, civilized societies, and you know, there's still a dramatic contrast that can be had, even though in reality there's some kind of a spectrum in terms of the difference. And why is that so? Because what happens is that Adam and Eve introduced this idea of introduced the sin, and what happens is that it's there in their, they introduce it as a part of their world, and it's something that's gradually developed by different cultures, different societies over time. And so those that capitalized on it in any kind of massive, intense way, really engaged this path to civilization, and those that sort of had it within the frame of their society, not really powerfully engaging it, they sort of remain in the wild, sort of approximating Adam and Eve in innocence. All right. Now we also wanted to talk about God's state in the garden, whether it was material or immaterial. There's a mixture of both, because the garden is physically out there, right? But the garden is also what's perceived inside of man in terms of his brain, right? Because for a man to become real in time and space, he has to be able to construct stimuli from the outside, and that stimuli has to be read and perceived in his brain, so that what's out there is actually perceiving in his brain what is actually out there, and that makes him real, and that within time and space, right? So the garden exists in him in terms of his brain. It exists in him spiritually, at a spiritual level, in terms of the realm and the dimension of spirit, right? His spirit is in the Garden of Eden, in the kingdom of God, as well as his body being on earth in the pureness of which God created. Now, God actually moving in the garden is both physical, that means, and material, that means, and immaterial. That means he came to Adam and Eve after he created them. He walked with them and amongst them, talking to them. They recognized them, but he's also talking to them in spirit. It's like the notion of Jesus, to Christians, is that Jesus is actually a flesh being, a being that's physical, talking to them in flesh, but then there's also the spiritual, immaterial being of God in spirit, talking to man and communicating to man in spirit, through his conscience, and speaking to him in spirit. All right. Now, we also pointed out that, during the last discussion, that nature is a moral force. Nature, so that when man is moral, he actually fits nature. The design and the order that God created in Genesis chapters 1, he laid it out, and then he put man in that order and instructed man morally, right? This is how you fit the order, right? And then that's a moral design that's established. Now, when man becomes immoral in himself, then he drops out of nature. Though he's there physically, he's not integral to nature. He's not integral to the systems and the operations of nature. So then he drops out, and he's disconnected from nature. And then nature becomes this other, and he has an antagonistic relationship to nature, right? Now, nature as a moral force, God, because it imbues God and embodies his spirit and his being, nature is going to react to him as this other. As he's addressing nature as some other, right? He's distancing himself from nature because fundamentally he's distancing himself from himself. Nature becomes this other, this villain, this thing to be used to, to be obstructed or to approached inappropriately, but though he's not seeing it that way, he's in his twisted mind, he's approaching it appropriately to secure his form, his life or whatever. But nature itself is going to respond to him as other and is going to be an enemy to him. In the normal state of nature in which God created man to fit nature, man is supposed to operate morally and be a credible partner in nature, and God responds to him affectionately. That means nature responds to him affectionately. But when he sins against God, really he in effect offends nature, and nature responds in kind. And so God says, thorns and thistles it's going to bring unto you. But by the sweat of your brow you're going to eat bread. This is going to be cursed is the ground for thy sake. Things like that. Saying nature is you're gonna enjoy an agonized existence with nature because of your immorality. So nature responds to you because of your immorality. Now, I had pointed out before that there's some aspects of fear, right? In Adam's sin. One, there's aspect of fear being a dissociation from self, the effect of the dissociation from self, where man ends up hiding from himself. As Adam was hiding from God in the garden when he heard God call, and then he finally met God and said, I was afraid. I heard you and I was afraid. God is himself, is root being. And so what's being displayed there is him hiding from himself, right? Because he's worried. And there's that dimension of fear that you're in effect you're hiding from yourself. If you're living in a state of fear, you're hiding from yourself. Why? Because your root self is God. He is your conscience. And why are you hiding? You know it's going to convict you of the life you're living, of living in sin. So if you're living in fear, it's because you're living in sin, and you're avoiding your conscience, your root self, because you know it's going to convict you for the life you're living. Right? There's that aspect of fear. The other aspect of fear is that because Adam sinned and decided to make himself a creature of flesh, that was the effect of his sin. Make himself a creature of flesh and try to use flesh to characterize his ego, use flesh to predicate. His ego is going to be predicated upon his flesh and his existence of flesh. So flesh, the sanctity and the health and the welfare of flesh becomes important, and he has to be worried about it, because if he loses his flesh, the life of this flesh, then his whole ego is gone, right? Because flesh is the basis of his ego. So if he loses that, then his ego existence is gone, right? His existence as an ego dependent upon flesh, that's gone. So there's that fear that's associated with that. Then there's the reality. His fear is, in a sense, then the third aspect of it is in a sense justified by the fact that nature is going to make his life agonized. Nature is going to threaten his physical life. Nature is going to be harsh to him. So his fear is, in a sense, then justified for his physical existence, because nature is coming out against him physically. Right? It's thorns and thistles against him. It's creating this. God created a snake. It offered the snake to come against him and to bite at his feet, and to try to kill him. So he actually has to worry. So there is a justification to that worry once he takes on existence as flesh, because nature is a moral force. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out is that Adam's sin, which was from the last slide, was Adam's sin could only arise from a particular mindset. Only arise from the mindset that he wanted to be his own God. And if he wanted to be his own God, he was going to become insecure, which is in effect death, spiritual death. So then, therefore, when God said, here's the tree to feed off, the tree of life. Here's the tree not to feed off, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, if you feed off it, you're going to die. That means the only way you're going to feed off of it, you're going to have to develop a particular mindset to disrespect me and become insecure and want to be your own God, become insecure and be dead. So there's only one mindset that Adam can have to be dead. There's only one mindset, and it is to become his own God. So therefore, when God sees him insecure, and he's saying he's insecure, he's insecure. I'm ashamed. When Adam says, "I'm ashamed," I was naked, and he knew he was naked, and he had to put on clothes. He's insecure. Then it must be that he touched the tree, because there's only one mindset that could have made him insecure. And so even before he touched the tree, God pointed it out. You're gonna die if you touch the tree. That means the only way you're gonna die is you have to have that mindset. There is no other way around it. Not casual curiosity. All right. So that's our review from what we did, and I pointed out also that sin requires a particular deliberate mindset. It was with a deliberate mindset that Adam and Eve decided to feed off the tree of knowledge of good and evil, their physical form. All right, let's move on. Now, when 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 we talk about vice and virtue, now you're going to realize that in 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 the state of nature, man living in the wild is state in the wild is sort of is different from man living in civilized society. And remember, we're making we're making some contrast, in effect, almost pretending that they're absolutely different. Which in reality, as we pointed out, there's a strain of sin for man in the wild, and that Adam and Eve passed on, and then there's a massive development of that sin for man in civilized society. But anyway, speaking in approximate terms, a man in the wild, the primitive man, indigenous man that we've known, or Adam and Eve in the wild, what's virtuous in the wild becomes a vice in civilized existence, and what's a vice in the wild becomes a virtue in civilized existence. And here are the examples that I want to refer to in terms of clothing, ambition, diligence, and the quest for knowledge. Right? Clothing. In a natural state, man in the innocence in the wild, he doesn't need clothing. He's not conscious of his body, and his own reality is based upon that idea of not being self-conscious, of not being insecure, right? His reality is based upon the idea that he's secure in himself, which means that if he's secure in himself, he's also secure in nature, and he's having a profound relationship with nature, and a respectful relationship with nature, and a reverence of nature. So therefore, clothing would be inappropriate. If he puts on clothing, then it marks a state of insecurity. So in a state of nature, clothing becomes a vice, and it was that marked to God that Adam had lost his security in himself. When God called him, and Adam finally showed up and said, "Oh, I was naked," then okay, my computer is acting fishy. Then he's saying basically, I discovered my nakedness. I am aware. All right. I apologize. This is my computer just skipped. I warned previously. I want to finish my discussion on clothing before I get to ambition. Um, so in that state of in Adam putting on clothes, it signaled to God that he had become insecure, which is an offense right then and there, because he wasn't supposed to be insecure. He's supposed to be secure in himself. Man living in the wild, then it's clothing for him is not appropriate. And if you observe primitive cultures, innocent cultures, you'll notice that they basically don't have on any clothes because they basically are secure in themselves. They don't notice their physical form, right? They do, they take it for granted, basically almost like the other animals. Now, why they are not 100% pure, sometimes you'll see them with some level of garment covering their genitals. It's because of that sin that Adam passed on, but it's not massively developed, as pointed out before. All right, but um, but in the state of innocence, clothing would be inappropriate. But in the state of corrupted innocence, in the state of innocence loss, clothing is absolutely appropriate. Right? Because now your innocence is lost, you're focused on flesh, you're seeing flesh, you understand flesh, the lust of flesh, and the corruption that comes with that. Because once you start lusting after flesh and you start ingraining yourself in flesh, um, you lose interest in spirit, and become more immoral, become immoral in flesh, subjecting yourself to the passions of flesh. So then clothing becomes a virtue. Now, it's virtuous for God for that specific reason that I just mentioned, because it it is supposed to reduce, the lust of flesh, and so that man can focus more on spirit and get back to God and get back to moral understanding. Now, in terms of the values of societies, of civilized societies that have already been corrupted and are engaging Adam's sin, Adam's notion, um, flesh, the lust of flesh is only a means to an end. And so clothing also serves a value there to reduce the lust of flesh so man can focus on something greater, which is the ego, on his ambition. All right, which we're getting into right now. So man can focus on his ambition and reduce the lust of flesh. So clothing becomes a virtue in the state of innocence lost, both for the evil man chasing his ambition predicated upon the notion that flesh must be used, and for God, which he communicates through spiritual systems, that flesh, you should not try to get into flesh, into the desires of flesh. Restrain yourself from the desires of flesh and from the desires of flesh and the lust of flesh, and focus on spirit and lust after life in spirit and the virtues of spirit. All right. Now, ambition. That's the other thing. Ambition in the state of innocence is a vice. Man isn't supposed to be ambitious. He's supposed to just live contented with himself, with his fellow man, live in content with nature. So therefore, when you see indigenous man living in the wild, he's not ambitious. He's not trying to develop massive systems. He's not, collectively and individually, he's not trying to go after some ideal. He's just trying to live within the structure and order of the society, which is basically egalitarian. Rules are dictated and order is dictated as to who he marries, our property, or whatever, property is transferred or circulated within the society. What are the relationships that are to be established, and so forth and so on, and the rules for that. So his world is pretty much dictated by an order which he conforms to, and it's an order which embeds itself in a circular pattern that really is not conducive to striving for some sort of goals outside of that, to reach beyond that. But it's just to fit within the structure of the society, fit within the nature and the order of nature, and to live a contented and relaxed life. Now, in the state of innocence lost, where man now is divorced from himself and he's chasing after some great ego, and his whole socio-political reality has changed, ambition becomes important for individual man. It is well to be ambitious. Now, not to be ambitious, to stray away from yourself in civilized realities. Now, the idea is that you should accept yourself, even in these realities, but your ambition should be to express yourself, express your natural gifts to to their maximum potential, as much as the society offers, as much opportunities, that's there for you to take advantage of. You take advantage of that. So ambition in that sense, in the state of innocence lost, becomes a virtue. But again, it depends on the nature of your ambition. If your ambition is to strive away from yourself, thinking you're becoming some other self, then that's a poor ambition. That's a bad notion of ambition. The better notion of ambition is for you to accept yourself, even though the world around you is about not accepting self. Your notion should be to accept yourself, and then the ambition for you is to maximize your natural talents and your natural gifts to the pleasure of God, and ultimately it'll serve mankind. All right, now let's move. Diligence in the state of nature. Diligence, hard work, is a vice. Hard work, you don't need to be working hard. How God created the order and put man in it, Adam and Eve in there, they're supposed to be relaxed, enjoying nature around them. There's nothing to work for. Life, basically, God is saying to them, life is a vacation. Enjoy it. Enjoy each other's companionship as human beings. Enjoy the companionship of the animals. And take care of nature. Just, and just feed off the produce of nature. Everything is good. Just live a peaceful and relaxed lifestyle. And that's basically how it is for man, primitive man, indigenous man in nature, just to live a peaceful and relaxed lifestyle. Right? There's no, he doesn't need the clock. He doesn't need, some military routine that he needs to go by, and force himself to go by particular times. Rather, he goes by by his physiological system. It goes by the systems in nature. It just goes by how he feels, and there's a certain natural impetus as to what he wants to do, when he wants to do it. And it works with a work. It might do it. It might be by himself, or it might be with a group. But it's just a natural feeling as to what natural inclinations, natural drives, but not something unnatural and emotionally dysfunctional as to his having to abide by particular times, like having to get up by 8 o'clock, or be at a certain place by 9 o'clock, and then have to leave, then end at 5 o'clock, regardless of what the day is offering, or how he feels. He has to go by that routine that imposes a certain stress on him, right? But in his relaxed lifestyle, he gets up when he feels like, when his companions around him are up, and when they're ready to go out and maybe get some food and bring back for the village. But it's easy movements, easy and relaxed, peaceful lifestyle. And why is that too? Because within themselves they're easy and relaxed and at peace with themselves. Now, that kind of state is not appropriate for innocence lost, when man is in a civilized existence. In a civilized existence, it is now a virtue to be diligent, to work hard, to get up and to strive, and to because when man sinned, what did God say? um, God turned man out of the garden, and to till the soil, to work the soil. And he also said, by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread. Right? So hard work now becomes a virtue. This is the new mode of living, right? Man brought the sin into his world, and now it changed his old reality, and because of that sin, individually, even collectively, working hard to ensure life, that becomes a virtue. Okay, you can't sit around and be relaxed when the world around you is not that. You can't just decide when you're gonna get up and go out and secure um, earnings or income or sustenance while the world outside you is functioning on routines. So and schedules. So you have to sort of get into that rhythm. And if you're going to have your ambitions, realize your natural ambition, realize and achieve a certain success, you have to get into that routine on behalf of yourself, on behalf of God, on behalf of what it is, your purpose upon the earth. You actually have to work hard in the state in the world that we're in now, right? And that's the way it's been for civilized existence. Once you're in that realm, in that socio-political reality, you have to work hard. All right. Now, the quest for knowledge, we can close out with that. Now, in the state of innocence, the knowledge that you get is the truth from God. You're in God's periphery. You're basically responding to God, and what you're getting is truth. And so there's a and and so it translates also to primitive man and his society. He develops in the wild, and there's a natural instinct that he develops in terms of interacting with the wild. There's a natural way in which his culture develops, and he's supposed to live within the realms and bounds of his culture and not question it, not challenge it, because if he's challenging it, he's going to be challenging himself really and becoming self-conscious. He's supposed to live within the bounds and realms of his culture, accepting the knowledge that's passed on to him, and the reality around him, and live contented and relaxed. No chase for anything, no quest for more to understand or to start becoming self-conscious about all his own reality. It is a state of acceptance, and so he has to accept what comes to him instinctively from God, which those cultures in nature are created from God in terms of the natural systems that are developed. It's just a natural instinct. Nature gave it to them. God is nature, and showed them how to fit in with for their lifestyle, to fit in with nature, and how they should live amongst themselves. And it's not for anyone within those socio-political realities to challenge that. It's for them to live within the realms and accept whatever explanation there is of the world around them. Now, with innocence lost, right, and living in a civilized state, now the quest for knowledge becomes a virtue. You constantly have to be learning, right? You constantly have to know more and more and get to understand your reality more and more to make sense of it and to fit it in, because you're in a state of innocence lost. You're in a state of quest, of searching, right? So in order for you to find the truth now, you have to go search for it, because you're disconnected from yourself. In a sense, you have to search to get back to yourself, right? And to understand God again. You have to search again to understand the truth of nature now, because you're looking at it with a different lens than you were in an innocent state. So you have to actually do the research and try to understand it and try to learn more, and by learning more and accepting truth, you become a better person. So the quest for knowledge is entirely appropriate in the state of innocence lost. All right. So it's not appropriate for you to be ignorant in times when in these modern times, especially where the world depends upon you having knowledge and searching for knowledge and learning truth and becoming more aware of the world around you, becoming more aware of even yourself and understanding yourself spiritually, physically, understanding nature, understanding your impact on nature, understanding how nature impacts us, and what is our relevance. All right, all right. In any event, that's all we'll do for today. I hope you'll you know subscribe to my YouTube channel. I hope you'll share my videos. You like this one and others that I've done, and spread the word and get this book, Existence, God, Man, Society, and Nature, on www.amazon.com. All right, until next time, God bless. Take care.